Welcome to those of you who are joining this webinar, and we're looking forward to others joining. We'll start the webinar in a couple of minutes. Welcome to the webinar, everyone. We're going to wait for a couple of minutes until people join, and we'll start in 1 or 2 minutes. All right, I think we'll kick off. So welcome everyone to the webinar. Very good to have you all with us. This is a webinar set up by the Commercial Agriculture for Smallholders and Agribusiness Programme, CASA. That's been established by the UK's DFID, which is now the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO. The CASA programme aims to make the commercial and development case for investing in agribusinesses that source produce from smallholders. So CASA bridges evidence gaps to ensure that investors and policymakers have access to the right information and people to make inclusive agribusiness models succeed. The aim of CASA is to attract more investment into the sector, boosting economic growth and raising demand for smallholder produce. It does this through 3 key areas of work: supporting market access, investor technical assistance, and research for investors and policymakers. So as part of CASA's efforts to shape the debate on smallholder agriculture while creating networking opportunities, CASA organises global, regional and national events, bringing together investors and investment support stakeholders. This is the second of the 3 sessions that form CASA's first Global Agribusiness Investor Summit. Each of the sessions focuses on one evidence report commissioned by the CASA programme, aiming to address existing evidence gaps. This research is launched today and is available on the CASA website at casaprogram.com. Our first session this morning was about ICTs for improving investment readiness of small and medium agribusinesses, and the recording for that will also be available on the CASA website. This session is about the effectiveness of agribusiness incubation in emerging markets, and we will have some explanation of the research that's been done by CASA, followed by some experience from incubators who are identified by the researchers as leading in their field. So I think, first of all, I will give the floor to Alberto, who will present the key findings from the research. Next, we'll have presentations from the panelists, and I'll introduce each one separately, and they'll have a few minutes to provide those details of their own experience. If you have questions, we will have a question and answer session at the end, so please send your questions in using the chat function, and we'll monitor them and pass them on to the panelists. If you can provide your name and your affiliation, then great, that helps us. The session will be recorded, as I say, and made available through the CASA website. So first of all, I want to pass over to Alberto Didoni. He is the founder and managing director of Varcando Limited, a consulting firm that provides advisory services to companies and investors on cross-border transactions and investment projects in emerging and frontier economies. He's worked for major international organizations such as the World Bank and IFC in Central and Latin America, and for venture capital funds specialized in microfinance and SME lending in sub-Saharan Africa. And he has been leading on the research that CASA has commissioned. Alberto, look forward to hearing more about the research, and then we'll turn it over to the panelists for their views. Thank you, over to you.
Thank you, Alice, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. As was mentioned by Alice, the paper that is currently being that is available on the CASA website looks at the effectiveness of agribusiness incubators in emerging markets over the last 10 years, the effectiveness in bringing investments into the sector. Globally, we have analyzed the performance of about 20 odd agribusiness incubators and selected 6 to study more in detail. The 6 that we have selected are following. So ABI AgriSat, so the agribusiness incubator AgriSat, and Filroy in India. So 2 incubators from India, 1 from Brazil, Centeb UFV, who is attached to the University of Vicosa in Brazil, 1 from Chile, from the Fundación Chile, and then 2 from in Africa, 1 Acre Fund in East Africa, and then Timbali in South Africa. Why did we select those incubators? They have been around for a long time. They have contributed significantly to fostering the emergence of micro, small, and medium enterprises in the agribusiness sector in their respective countries and in other countries, in some cases. And they have reached tangible results by documenting those. They have documented properly those results that they have achieved. We have looked also at other experiences in incubating agribusinesses. For example, the UniCresat experience in Africa. That is the UniBrain experience in Africa that has incubated 6 incubators and other documents that have explained the evolution of other incubators, but mainly the research work is focused on those 6. Just to give you an example of what they have achieved, one Acre Fund in East Africa was not really a typical incubator, but could be classified as a similar methodology as Timbali, for example, in South Africa. Have reached over 1 million smallholder farmers, or Timbali as well in South Africa has worked with more than 200 micro enterprises. Filroy in India has incubated over 300 companies during the last 20 years, and ABI AgriSat has incubated more than 100 companies, most of whom 75 of those are still existing nowadays. So how can we classify incubators overall? We came up with 2 broad classifications. One is a technology transfer incubator. Those are incubators whose role is mostly to support and foster the technologies for the agribusiness sector. and the other category is value chain incubators, whose role is more to organize particular value chain around a given crop and foster the micro enterprises and the small enterprises that are working in that space. The paper goes along by describing the characteristics of those incubators, both the technology transfer ones and the value chain incubators, and identifying the key reason for success. Among those key reasons, we have, well, first of all, they have been founded and by people with a clear mission and vision on where to go, what to do. They are professionally run. So although some of them are incorporated as, most of them are incorporated as profit. However, the level of professionalism is very similar to a private enterprise. They keep a strong focus on their mission, their objectives, and they have developed an efficient and well-structured incubation process, meaning be them a technology-oriented incubator or value chain incubator, their incubation process is clear, starting from the selection of incubatees, so the companies or the micro enterprises or the smallholder farmers that are going to be part of that program are selected rigorously according to precise criteria. So that's the first step, and then they go on to setting up clear criteria, structural criteria for the process, the incubation process, the way those micro and small enterprises are supported, and then also a clear idea of the exit process, meaning how can we let them go, how can they be financially and, or I would say operationally sustainable on their own. So the importance, I said, of the structure of the incubation process is evidenced by the fact that they received a lot of investor support or donor support because of that, the fact that they can show results on the ground. They show the capacity of incubating successfully those enterprises. In spite of the fact that they have been, all of them, very successful in doing so, as I said, most of them are incorporated as non-profit, not-for-profit, or they are attached to universities. So they are part of university programs. This is and after a few years of activities, they are still somewhat dependent on the support of either donors or other type of funders, such as governments or government-related entities, ministries, or local governments. This is one way to interpret that is to look at the active role that those incubators play in the communities, and the fact that for their activities of national or subnational interest, because they are able to create good companies from scratch and identify entrepreneurs from scratch, and then being able to let them evolve into sustainable companies. Another couple of interesting takeaways from the study is the fact that, and some recommendations from the work that we have carried out, is there seems to be a scope for stronger relationship with early stage investors. One of the key conditions of the success agribusiness incubators, I shall say, of every incubator is the presence of early stage investors that could then support those companies that have been incubated. We perceive that there could be, in some cases, a stronger case or a strong case for integrating early stage investors into the process of the accelerators. For example, we suggest form of partnerships where early stage investors could participate in selection committees of incubatees or incubated. We suggest possibilities of financial partnership, meaning early stage investors that could invest into agribusiness incubators to generate pipeline to a significant level. This is one area of recommendation. The other area is around measuring success. We have noticed that every incubator has their own KPIs. Some of them have been chosen by or agreed with the donor, with the supporters of the incubator, but it is difficult to compare performances of incubators across the globe, given that everybody uses their own KPIs. So what would we suggest? We suggest that it would be useful to create a framework, a global framework to measure performances across incubators, so that investors and donors could be able to compare performances across the spectrum. Of course, with a wide difference between activities, and value chain incubator cannot be compared technically with a technology transfer one, but at least to have a common framework on per typology. And also to insist on
Alberto, I'm going to have to ask you just to complete. Alberto, I'm just going to have to ask you to wrap up. Sorry, we're at time. Thank you.
Yes.
I know you had one final recommendation.
Yes, the final recommendation is around the value for money, meaning as part of that framework, also look at ways to compare incubators across using a value for money metrics, I shall say, variables, I shall say.
Fantastic. Great. Well, thank you. So it's a very good summary of the report, which those of you who can see this, the chat, it's the link on the chat will take you to the research. So either look at it on the website later, or that link on the chat will take you there. Thank you very much for summarizing it for us there, Alberto. And we're now going to turn to panelists who you spoke to as part of the research and who have deep experience of incubators, really addressing some of those recommendations and some of those questions. In particular, how can we make sure that we have the conditions for success of those incubators? How will the reduction in grants availability because of COVID and other factors affect incubators? What is the way in which you can actively measure that incubator's performance in the way that you described, Alberto, and potentially their role in reducing gender disparity? Each of the panelists is going to give their own experience, and we're going to be starting with, first of all, Srinivas Ramanujam, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Filroy, which is one of India's pioneering incubators of social enterprises. He's an IIM Calcutta alumnus. At Filroy, he began his journey as an advisor to one of their incubatees, Flavour Innovations, and before that, he was an entrepreneur and helped incubate business concepts across the auto and farm sectors. He's also the India Steering Committee member of Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs. Srinivas, your perspectives on those points that were made in the report, please.
Thank you, Alice. Hello, everybody. Yeah, so let me jump right into those points. What's interesting for us is, at Filroy, we've been around for 20 years, and in those 20 years, we've seen a whole bunch of kind of evolution within India of how social enterprises weren't such an important aspect of the ecosystem, but now as things have evolved, enterprises, particularly in the agriculture sector, are becoming supremely important. So to answer the first question, incubators play a critical role, but if we had to see why or how they could succeed, I split it into three parts. Yeah, one is an aspect of all external factors. First is the kind of entrepreneurial activity in the space, right? And in agriculture is really broad, but within that, what kind of aspects are interesting? Is it in the market linkage? Is it in what technologies, or just in farming per se? Yeah. The second, within those external factors, is the kind of support that they get from public institutions. It could be governments, or it could be even private institutions like foundations, think tanks, and so on. The kind of support which comes in from policy. So these things play a role. And the second piece, as I see it, apart from these external factors, is how is the internal aspect of the organization, of the incubator organized. Yeah. And the first one is, of course, availability of human talent, right? Is the kind of business acumen required to help such an entrepreneur, or does it exist? Are there enough experienced folks who are willing to work in the social sector, right? So these things will sort of govern how an incubator can succeed. And then there is the process of able to use this talent, connect and collaborate with these kinds of institutions, right? It could be public or it could be private. But the interest in making those connections is going to be supremely important. So a combination of these three is going to govern whether this model, which I think in India is quite evolved, can get replicated in some other market. Yeah, I'm sure that there are the markets which are more mature than India. There's those which are less mature. So I think while replication, yes, is possible, it's just going to be a question of how time to maturity, one, and two, the kind of outcomes that one expects. Yeah, but yeah, definitely it is replicable. The second point you're speaking about, the access to grants and what's going to happen. Right, the hard reality is that money is in short supplies today. Yeah, on two fronts. One is there's a lot of these early stage investors, angels, who've been active in India. Many of them depend on stock markets to increase their wealth, and the excess income generated is what is being deployed. Stock markets are down, so there is going to be a paucity of funds on that front. The second thing that in India was a big source of funding was corporate social responsibility. Right? There was a law in India which mandates that expenditure from listed companies. With profits going down, even that pool of funding is sort of quite limited now. So both of this is going to stress the space, right? So what have we done at Wilgrow? And that's a learning I think that's going to be universally applicable. The reality is there's fewer amount of money, there are fewer grants. So we've internally started focusing on quote unquote those which are most successful, entrepreneurs who hustle, who are able to show some traction faster, right? Who have greater efficiency of using capital and also greater efficiency in using our support. So the reality is that there's going to be some amount of prioritization, right? And there is going to be some, it's harsh, but there will be some collateral damage. And the faster we accept it and see who we can support is going to be important. So the third point, I think, Alberto, you brought it up, on how do we even measure programs across countries. Of course, it's not going to be similar. And in Wilgrow, the one thing that we did is we used a metrics called IRIS, right? The Impact Reporting and Investment Standards, which was developed by GIN, the Global Impact Investing Network. And we combined this with the kind of SDG goals that were there and said, how could we then use this to, one, fold it into the way the company is able to measure impact. Right? So IRIS has specific aspects of measuring business and also those specifically looking at seeing how it's impacting end beneficiaries. Right? So we've had reasonable success in measuring our company's performance and seeing whether we can report those. And the second thing that we've looked at is seeing how we can measure our own work. Right? So one parameter that we found useful is what we call social return on investment, SROI. However, SROI can vary widely between years. and it depends on the stage of the company that one's picking in the portfolio. Yeah. So last year we had a phenomenal ratio. This year the ratio is far lower because we are working with earlier stage companies. But the third aspect is also there might be specific programs, right? So we do a lot of work in mentoring and technical assistance. So there's a lot of intellectual capital that's going in, right? So when you make connections with a technology institute, right, or we help someone connect and open doors with a large agri-commodity player, there's no way you can monetize it. So there is no hard and fast rule or definition, but I think what's going to be useful is to see how many such programs are running, how many connections have been made, right? So those are probably thought starters on how one could compare incubators across countries. Yeah. And the last one, in fact, on how do we make it more inclusive? How do we ensure that there is more gender participation, not just among beneficiaries, but also among the entrepreneurs that we support? So the first up, I think a disclaimer is in India, there have been fair number of programs that support women in sciences and technology. It's not enough, right? So I think less than 10% of the entire pool of professionals in STEM are women. That's the reality that we live in. We can't change that, right? We've got to change something at the primary level if you want to influence that today. However, looking at those that are in this space, we are looking at seeing how we could consciously say that there is a program for women-led businesses. In particular, that we will invest in a certain number of people, a certain number of businesses which are women-led. We are also very particular in seeing whether business models.
We need to just wrap up the points, but yes, point well made.
Yeah, so my last point is a couple of things: putting in quotas and getting in specific hard-coded deliverables into programs has been working for us. Yeah, and with that, I think I can take questions later on.
Thank you very much, and we're getting questions in which we'll come back to, but many thanks for that. That's really interesting, your perspective on all those questions. And just to highlight that, as you can see from the panel, we have a range of different experiences, both from South Asia and from Africa. Our next panelist is also from the South Asian region, but we see AGRF as a really good opportunity to have this sort of South-South learning as well as any other kind of exchanges. So it's great to see the international flavour of the panelists. Our next panelist, Jonathan Filroy, is a manager with the Agribusiness and Innovation Platform AIP at ICRISAT in Hyderabad. He manages the agribusiness incubator operations that involve working with ag tech startups in validating and scaling up their business ideas and products and services with help from the ICRISAT scientific community and resources. So Jonathan, really interested to hear your perspectives on the questions that we've been posed.
Yeah, good afternoon everyone. Thanks Alice. I want to thank CASA for inviting ICRISAT to be a part of the panel, and also thanks to Alberto for putting together the report and the summary. That was very well done. On the four questions that we have, and we come from a technology business incubator background, supported by a host institute. So to add on to what Srinivas mentioned about the different factors that he put out, the internal and the external one, mine also is kind of like centered around that. And because most of the incubators in India are TBIs, technology business incubators, they are funded by an external organization, and in most cases by Government of India itself. So therefore, it is important that there's a very good linkage between the host institute, or sort of like the anchor institute, and the incubator, and the rest of the thing being the incubator professional staff and all that, and the type of entity and all that you put together. So it's a very critical component when you look at in terms of how the host institute enables the incubator to actually go forward in terms of operations. From our personal experience on running these incubator projects, we have seen that at very close quarters in both in India and Africa as well, how such enabling environment can be created by such host institutes. The other ones could be in terms of the advisory team and all that, and access to facilities, scientists. They make a big difference, especially when it comes to the agri-tech startup kind of a world, where most of the founders are non-agri guys, and it's mostly engineers who are actually coming in and starting their business ventures, and then we have to plug in the science part of it and help them with the infrastructure and facilities and all that. Another important point being that we also need to factor in the whether we are working in a metro city, a large city which has its own startup ecosystem already developed, or are we looking at a tier 2 or tier 3 kind of a location where it's going to be more difficult to actually build up that pipeline of a startup. So in terms of that building up of the incubation base and the ecosystem, that we need to go through that. The external side of it, definitely I mentioned earlier, like, the policy part and the entrepreneurship areas, those are all very vital. It's also important to keep in mind that we could play the agri incubation centers as a facilitator, kind of like a brokering part between different stakeholders. And look at the value chain. We have so many number of stakeholders in between that we could play a role in talking and initiating dialogue between the stakeholders, and then getting that feedback. And then when the startups are coming in into the pipeline, or when your current startups are there, we could feed in this kind of information to them to actually say that there's an opportunity, there's a gap in the system. Can this be plugged in with your startup, with their technology, etc. around that? And in terms of, if you want to scale up these models, along with the internal parameters that we mentioned earlier, we could think about, newer models are coming up in terms of creating the external ecosystem, so to say. I think the Marion Kaufman Foundation came up with the e-ship model. Bradfeld and Techstars have come out with the 7 capital models which are there. So we could take a look at those kind of models and start putting those systems in place before we even start thinking about, okay, do we need to, okay, there's a donor who is willing to fund. Do I need to just jump in and create a facility, or do I just evaluate, look at the ecosystem, and then start building together around that? Because there's going to be a lot of buzz around people who can create jobs than people who are going to seek jobs in that. Because the pandemic is now coming in, and the economic impact is now going to be felt in full. I mean, till now it's been all containment, and we just were working around that. So even though startups have got funding from various projects and other things which were already running, the pipeline is going to get constrained now. Whatever has come in has come in. Governments are running a bit low on funding. Funds getting diverted to more essential, important areas like healthcare. Investors also focusing on that. But it also gives, and long-term wise also, you want to see a lot more challenge areas. I mean, we were talking climate change and alternative proteins and other things earlier. They will still come into the picture because some of the investors are actively pushing for that. But is there going to be an appetite for that? Is going to be something to be looked at. At the same time, there's an opportunity for incubators as well. I mean, let's put it this way: we could have for-profit and non-for-profit incubation models, but incubators per se are like a startup again. You're running a business. You have to factor in all these challenges that you're going to face. So just like you have to look at the runway of startups, how much months can they survive, etc., etc. It's a time for you to actually come back and evaluate how you're operating, and then look at the metrics on which you're going to survive. Technology has enabled a lot of these, a lot of expenses can be now covered through these kind of models. I mean, we are having an international panel meeting right on this particular tool, sitting from our own homes or offices, wherever we are. And it's actually made up a lot of the gap in the system. And we have had B2B sessions for startups, a lot of investment meetings happening online, etc. But you're going to definitely miss the physical presence in the field. I mean, talking to farmers, talking to your customers, showcasing your startups, that's completely off the table. You can't, and that's going to be a big challenge for us. That's again going to come back to the role of the ecosystem again, because that's where the ecosystem has to come in. And one area where we have worked, because I mean, ICRISAT is situated in Hyderabad, in India. And in Hyderabad, all these incubators have come together to do an initiative called Rejig Startup Hyderabad. So basically all the startups in different sectors, healthcare, agri, food, banking, fintech, product, retail, everyone is there. It's close to around 125 startups which have applied. They have gone through a 1-month-long mentorship program where corporates are there, investors are there, mentors are there. We've gone through the whole process. This week is actually going to be the demo days where we're going to get these startups to actually pitch in front of a pool of investors or to government agencies or corporates, etc., to facilitate business deals. So that kind of thing comes in from that, the role of the ecosystem that comes in there. In terms of the value for money part, that the metric part is going to be very challenging, because you're going to talk about different set of incubators. I mean, we have TBI, we have Will Grow, which is into social impact startups, high impact ones. We have Timbali, which is into the value chain side. So the spectrum of incubators is large. Agri-business incubation center itself is a large complex area. So it's going to be an interesting one. Definitely such kind of what do you call the VFM, the value for money models. Happy to explore how we can work on that. Currently, the metrics are defined because you are funded by an agency and you report back to the agency because the agency has been already using these metrics. So you're looking at jobs, patents, etc. on that. And on the gender part, definitely that area is going to open up big time. We are seeing as an incubation center, because it's agri again, compared to say 5 years back, we are seeing more number of women-led startups or women co-founded startups. I mean, the numbers something like currently up to 40% of our current batch of startups are women or women co-founded ones. Jobs being created for women through the startups. There's an active interest in getting going in that. But areas where the donors, etc., could leverage would be that there's already the areas on which the incubator is operating, the training programs, the field activities, etc. So there could be areas where the donors could come look at it and say that you guys are already doing these things. We would like to
Thanks,
on that and take it forward.
Yeah, so, no, interesting. Yeah. No, great. Well, thank you also for managing to cover a lot of ground in a limited space of time. You've both done a tremendously good job of covering the ground, and sorry that the time isn't longer to be able to cover the ground even more. But moving on to Louise de Klerk, who is our next panelist, and thank you to both of our earlier ones from South Asia. She's based in Africa. She's the Chief Executive Officer and founder of Timbali Technology Incubator. It's in the Mpumalanga region of South Africa, and it seeks to help rural farmers whose livelihoods have been undercut by high volume large farms. It's supported by government financing and fee-based services, and it's largely based on a franchise model. And its clients supply cut flowers to Amablom, Timbali's commercial arm. So look forward to hearing your perspectives, Louise, on the questions. Louise, please go ahead. Yes.
Thank you very much, Alice. Also, Alberta, thank you for your report and your research. Thank you. I'd like to share practical information about those 4 questions that we're dealing with today. The effectiveness of incubators and how to really get investment and creating that ecosystem where there's early stage investors as well as some science or research centers. When we started Timbali 15 years ago, we went to the local land bank to borrow money for our first 12 cut flower farmers, and they said no ways because there's no security or collateral. So we went to the Mpumalanga Agricultural Development Corporation, and we actually went to them as incubator with the following service. We only had basically a promise of a service. So we said we don't have a magic bullet, but we've identified 2 bullets, so to say, that we're going to address and focus on as incubator. Firstly, competitiveness, to see how our farmers can compete in the marketplace. And secondly, we looked at productivity. Because without productivity, it's very difficult to really be financially viable. And we came up with a solution to say to allow our farmers to be competitive, we clustered them or grouped them together in groups. They don't necessarily have to be physically all together. They can be on their own land because the economy of scale allow them then to benefit from bulk buying and shared services like logistics, for example. The second focus area was the productivity. We looked at how do we give our small-scale farmer control in terms of managing their resources and giving a predictable quality product to the market. And we looked for a paint by numbers system, and we found it in the franchise industry in, for example, McDonald's. Because McDonald's does in 39,000 businesses that most can't do in one, any language, any culture. And we took that duplicatable model of young people driving a system and giving a predictable quality product. We applied that in niche markets such as cut flower and baby vegetables. And on the promise of the franchise, MIDC and the cluster concept, MIDC lent to our first 12 farmers about equivalent of $30,000 each, which they then paid back. Today, in a way, that investment, there's still a lot of room for improvement, but that set us out that today 20% of all the Gerbera cut flowers produced in South Africa are produced by those same Blom farmers, and 15% of the baby vegetables that is exported are exported by our small-scale farmers. Now, the dependence on donor funding. Timbali, right at the beginning, we said that as incubator, you can't give what you don't have. If we don't look after our clients in terms of market access and niche quality market access, we as incubator won't survive. So what we did, we actually we looked at the market as a key and not as a lock. We brought the market, and sometimes there were even, like in the vegetable markets, export markets, so that when we bring the markets and loan financing, because when you go into niche markets for retail and export, there's certain quality standards. The farmers sign a cession agreement in favor of Timbali. We bring the markets, and the investor has some security that the loan financing will be repaid. So in terms of the dependency, we're not there yet. But clients pay almost 10% in terms of 10% levies on their produce sold, and between 5 and 8% for 10% for export, between 5 and 8% for retail. So, and then we also provide that value chain services. Timbali is essentially a value chain incubator, so that the logistics, access to market, the incubator provide those services. So in terms of the dependence on loan financing, Timbali is not completely independent, but we are moving towards that. In the COVID time now, in the COVID period, our exports have really dropped significantly because our borders were locked. So essentially from April till now, we couldn't export. So we've looked at online incubation services where people can be anywhere and they can access the entrepreneurial aspect, the market access aspect, the technical production aspect, as well as the life skills and business aspect. We provide those services on an online platform. And then secondly, second last item is to have a global performance indicator across all incubators, and that big question of value for money. In South Africa, did a benchmark of all the incubators, and it was interesting to see how that value for money. If you just compare the KPIs in value for money, how it greatly varies. And secondly, we also had an independent evaluation of all the South African incubators, and it was also interesting to see the different, the value for money aspect. How it will be done is not, I don't know how that will be possible, but I do know that if that is possible, it will bring a huge benefit to the investors. And then
Louise,
lastly,
Louise, I'm sorry
before
to interrupt.
the gender item, how do we actually create a platform to reduce this gender disparity? Timbali never ever.
Thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate your insight and a really interesting model with the franchises. Thank you so very much. Really appreciate it. And last but not least, we're moving on to Ralph Vonkaufman, who is the co-founder of Hakika Limited and an associate consultant for African Agribusiness Incubators Network. Previously, he was responsible for the coordination of the facility for the university's business and research in agricultural innovation, UniBrain initiative, which is supporting the establishment of agribusiness incubators in Ghana, Kenya, Mali, Uganda, and Zambia. So looking forward to your experience too, Ralph. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alice. I appreciate this opportunity. I'm going to try and say something different to the things I agree from the previous speakers.
And I beg your pardon, Ralph. I just want to quickly say, if people want to ask questions, post them in the chat, and then when we can raise them with all the speakers. Over to you, Ralph.
Okay. There's plenty of evidence that incubators and accelerators can indeed and already do play a critical role in leveraging investments. I think Louise has pointed that out very clearly with Timbali, which operates in perhaps the most competitive of markets, cut flowers and fresh vegetables. One of the key KPIs of Timbali that I want to point out is that they raise about $250,000 a year from their SMEs for further investment in SMEs and technology transfers. And I think that's very significant. There are many other successes I could cite. However, I'm also aware that many incubators have failed to live up to their expectations, and they're a good source of the lessons worth learning. In my view, one of the fundamental reasons for the failures is that the founders of the incubators were more motivated by aspirations to do good for business without sufficient understanding of how to do good business for themselves. As Alberto said, they tend to be non-profit organizations. But even that should not have prevented them from becoming self-financing. As you mentioned, I was involved with UniBrain, which established incubators in 5 countries. At that time, nearly 10 years ago, incubators were very rare in Africa, and there was very little experience to build on. The situation today is very different. There are now lots of incubators across Africa from which experienced staff can be recruited. In Nairobi, just for example, it's possible to drive past 6 incubators in a distance of less than 2 miles. However, if starting a normal business is difficult and requires an incubator, it is still more difficult to start a business incubator itself because their clients are inexperienced, they lack finance, managerial and technical skills, and above all, they're unable to pay for the services that they require. That is quite different from normal startups who have paying customers. In these circumstances, the key to success of incubators and their applicability would be to create regional incubators of incubators, such as the ICRISAT ABI, dedicated to teaching, training, and giving experience in the specifics of establishing, managing, and operating agribusiness incubators. We benefited tremendously from ICRISAT ABI in UniBrain. But that creating incubators of incubators was the original purpose of establishing the African Agribusiness Incubator Network that I'm still attached to. And although it hasn't yet gained enough traction, it's still, in my view, a very valid concept. Now, turning to COVID, yes, it's true there may be less donor grants. However, in my view, there has never been, and there is not now, a shortage of money per se. Srinivas may disagree with this, but I'm not aware of any really good business proposition that has not been able to get finance. On the contrary, I'm aware of numerous very poor propositions that managed to raise a lot of money. A quick Google search will reveal many potential investors. In an earlier session this morning, we heard that the banks are awash with cash, but they face a major challenge in finding bank SMEs. As just one example, I was reading this morning Orbit's most recent report. They indicate that capital investment agriculture sector remains strong. They are managing 1.5 billion. And this year, investors have expressed interest in 280 million worth of active deals in Orbit's platform. The real problem then, in my view, is the dearth of good business propositions. Too many aspiring entrepreneurs are being encouraged to pursue concepts that are not truly innovative. How many times do we see people inventing yogurt and things like that? And they're not being encouraged to test their hypothesis with sufficient rigor, and they're not being prepared to pivot early enough and fast enough. Too few of them get out of the business, I'm quoting Stephen Blank, soon enough to test their products or develop their customers. As the consequence, the incubatees tend to stay too long in the protection of their incubators and fail to grow into significant generators of revenue from share appreciation or dividends for the incubators. And that is why the host incubators have to continue to depend on grants. That is not a necessary condition. This again indicates that incubators themselves need guidance and support in providing the right training and services to the incubatees and in making good investment choices amongst those incubatees. So in these circumstances, I believe having access to fewer grants could in practice do some good by forcing the incubator managers themselves to walk the talk, get out of the building to meet the many funds and foundations that are looking for viable investments. And why should an incubator not be a good investment? So turning to the issues of global standards, I think that global standards could be very valuable. But in my experience, such assessments are usually conducted too far out of context, and they also tend to be too rule-bound. I can cite instances of evaluators confessing amazement at the credible achievements of startups that they nevertheless rate down because the outcomes are not those that had been predicted in the original business plan or pitch. That is a travesty. In my view, global standards will only work if the evaluation process is built into the structure of the business models, with the critical assumptions being clearly stated and tested as the work progresses. The rating should not be based on how many assumptions fail, because that is part of the process.
Ralph, I'm very sorry. We've come to the end of the time. I'm so sorry. We'll have to just wrap up that thought, if you may.
So the proactive rating process cannot be done after that because the changes can only be understood at the time. So independent values should be given access to the building at any random time, and the assessment designed to inform management as much as investors. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Ralph. And what a tremendous set of interventions to give us real insight into the world of incubation. I've just been asked to remind you all that the links to the research are in the chat, and also please go online to the CASA website to see the research. And a question for all of you. Actually, I want to start with putting the challenge that Ralph has set to the incubator, the other three incubator runners here. Do you feel that there's that challenge which Ralph said about keeping incubators in for too long effectively, and then not enabling them to become viable, is a fair criticism in your experience, that you feel that you have the balance right between supporting them and getting them going and off your books? Let's start with Srinivas.
I think, Ralph, you said something which is spot on. Oftentimes we've had companies who hung on for too long and have used far too many of our resources. Honestly, we've gotten better at it. We've now consciously said that someone who cannot prove their product within 24 months will leave our program, right? So there is an automatic cutoff that we now put in place. But yeah, you're right.
Interesting. And Louise, your thoughts on that one? I know there's a lag on the line there. I'll can you hear us all right, Louise? I know there is a lag on the line, but your thoughts on the challenge of keeping people.
Yes, it's also we actually have two models. Our blown farmers are based. They've all. Yes, I can. It is a challenge, but I don't think there's one size fits all. There's sometimes merit in keeping your top incubatees as an income generator for your incubator. And at Mbali, we're just graduating a community of 150 farmers. We are graduating them out of the incubator altogether. So it sometimes takes time to get things right, but we're literally graduating a whole community out of the incubator and moving on to the next one, because it is a challenge. Ralph has hit it on the head. It is a challenge.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, and Jonathan, your take on that challenge of getting the right balance between keeping them supported and not moving to Jonathan. Yeah.
Well, Ralph is correct in a way. At the end of the day, we are running an incubation center to support startups who have taken the plunge, taken the risk to start their own dreams, and they're trying to achieve it. I think where we kind of like miss the trick with incubation centers is that we don't encourage them to pivot fast, to go, for fail fast. But the thing is, with agri-specific incubation centers, the gestation period is a bit longer than when compared with a tech-oriented player. So while if you look at the general incubation period, maybe 3 years, 2 years for Wilgrow, 3 years for most of us. Post which there is, I mean, every day, every year, there's an evaluation of where we are going, etc. But then, do we let them go? Most cases, it does happen that we have to, because they are not responding, etc. That is there. But then there will always be the case where you will have some of those successful, really good ones who we would like to retain as a tenant startup as well, because of the sustainability part, which Louise just mentioned there. So you have to look at both sides of this, of that.
Yeah, fantastic. And a question which has come in from Mafazzo Mazalingua Ndao around that success rate in incubation, and whether there is a success rate you're sort of trying to keep to. Alberto, in your research, was there any overriding sort of picture of what the success rate that you're expecting from those incubators might be, or is that just a too general a question, depending on the type of incubator and the type of support?
Well, indeed, there are two different types, as I mentioned before. So for the value chain, they have separate measurements. But for the technology-based, I believe the two Indian incubators that are here have at least 75% of enterprises that graduate, and they are still in existence 1 year after the post-incubation period, if I'm not mistaken. So that's a good treasure for India, at least.
Great, thank you very much for that insight. And a question from Hemant Nituka, which I'll ask to all of you, but I think starting perhaps with Ralph, is from what you know now globally, if a developing country is starting out to set up agri-incubators, what 3 key suggestions would you have for higher success? So a country perhaps that hasn't got that in place at the moment, where would you say from your experience that they should start? What's their main focus? Ralph first, and then we'll move to the others.
I was encouraged to hear Louise say that you can now go online and get Timbali's experience. I would advocate everybody who wants to start an incubator should access that tool. But there are other tools like Infosys where you can get the information. I think it's important to understand the issues before you start. There's a lot of people start with good motives but haven't actually understood. And I think the third point I'd say is go to an incubator, get first-hand experience, because running an incubator is not the same as running a normal business.
Perfect. And if we were going to go, say, to where did we start with Jonathan this time? What would your highlight be in terms, if you were going to set up an incubator in another country, go and see what other people are doing, as Ralph suggested. Yeah. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, you have to look at how it's being run there. Look at the ecosystem, the kind of partners that are available, and if it's going to be like a TBI or a institution-linked one, what is the host institution's intent? I mean, you can set it up today. The donor is giving you $1 million or 10 million or whatever to start up an incubation center, but what happens when the fund ends? The period is over. Is there a freedom to continue operating, etc.? Those all comes in. So the mission of the institution, the parent organization also matters.
Yeah, perfect. And the same question is to you, Srinivas, but do you think it's a different environment now with COVID? And do you think there's a different way in which you would suggest people should do it? Or do you think it still applies, the same rules apply?
I think the same rule applies. But like Ralph said, it makes sense to first understand what's happening on the ground and then what kind of protocols to put in. So Wilgrow, for example, has experience in setting up incubators in other countries. We set up a Wilgrow in Kenya. It's in Nairobi, and it's 4+ years old. We set up another incubator in the Philippines, so, and they're both are thriving. So what's important is, I think on one side, like I mentioned earlier, look at what kind of ecosystem that you're setting up in. And second is a whole bunch of protocols that we have inside. It's almost, how do you start breaking it down to seeing how you can see early signs of success, how you can engage the ecosystem, yeah? So I don't think it's changed much. I think we can make it into a kind of a process or a bunch of protocols which could take root in another ecosystem.
Brilliant, thank you. And I know I would love to come to you, Louise, and to Alberto, but I'm afraid we are short of time, so I'm going to have to wrap up there. So I wanted just to say thank you all so very much for the time you've spent on this webinar. The recording will be on the CASA website. And I wanted also to highlight that there are going to be every first Wednesday of the month CASA agribusiness breakthrough webinars, which will be on the events tab in our CASA website. So please do register on the events page if you want to be part of those monthly webinars. Finally, just wanted to say thank you very much to everybody who's helped to set this up, all the AGRF team, also to Simon Calvert and Liz Kirk at FCDO, and to all of our panelists who've shared their insights and who've contributed to the research. Once again, you can get the research if you want to hear more and read more on our website or in the link on our chat. But many thanks to you all. Appreciate it, and I've learned a lot and really enjoyed the webinar. So thank you all very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alice.
Thank you.
Nice meeting you, seeing you, Ralph and Louise.
Thank you.